First of all, I want to thank Isabel and Todd for inviting me and putting this show on. It's a lot of work. And I don't have the energy to do it, so. Crystal's story reminded me New York apartment stories, which I have a lot of myself, being a former New Yorker. Let's see right here. This way you can see it. This is another one of those. This is a New York apartment story. About 12 years ago, I moved into what I thought was a great apartment deal on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It turned out to be a drug bazaar with people hanging out in the foyer all hours of the night, making crazy noise, buying dope, waking me up in the middle of the night. My apartment was on the floor above. I tried to be cool, appealing several times to the dealer, a big guy in track pants and a muscle tee, to keep it down. I didn't care what they were up to. I just wanted to sleep. He'd give me a big smile, say, "No problem, bro," and I'd go back to bed. Then the commotion would pick up again an hour later and go through the night. This went on for a couple of weeks until one night when I went down to complain as usual. This time the dealer didn't smile or say anything, just glared at me. The next day, I got up late and went out for Chinese food. When I came back, the dealer and his girlfriend were standing at the entrance to the building like sentinels, as they often did. When I went to slide by, she whispered something that sounded like, "You're dead." I continued numbly up the stairs, wondering how this had become a scene in my life. When I got upstairs, I found that somebody had crazy glued my lock, and I had to call a locksmith to get into my apartment. Now I was really freaked. But I wasn't sure that I'd even heard her right. Maybe the glue was just kids in the building fucking with the new guy. I decided to lay low for a while, not make any complaints about the noise, and see how things went. The trouble was, I was sleep deprived, stressed out, and going a little nuts. When the noise came up the stairs one night at 3 a.m., I snapped. I marched out, half dressed, and called down to the foyer. "Listen, fellas," I said, in a voice that came to me from some TV cop show. "This isn't going to fly anymore. Get it? Business is closed." The dealer and his customers looked up at me like they couldn't decide whether to bust out laughing or come up the stairs and kick my ass. But my lizard brain kicked in and time slowed down as if I were in the middle of a car wreck. "And if you're thinking of doing something stupid right now," I said, "I wouldn't recommend it." Then I whipped around and marched back to my apartment. I slept straight through the night and woke up feeling better than I had in weeks. Over the next few days, I noticed my neighbors cutting me a wider berth than usual in the hall. I figured my outburst had earned me some grudging respect in the building. Meanwhile, the all-night noise in the foyer had died down. Then one afternoon, I was heading down my block, and I saw two boys from the building, about 10 years old, laughingly yanking a couple of pit bulls on choker chains, letting the dogs get within inches of tearing each other apart. As I got closer, one of the boys gestured in my direction and said to the other, "Be cool, he's a cop." And they pulled the dogs apart. Now it all made sense. The sudden deference of my neighbors and the hesitation of the dealer that night when I came on with my TV cop show voice and my sleep-deprived fearlessness. Because I'd heard about landlords in the neighborhood renting apartments to city cops for almost nothing to scare dealers out of buildings. This was a known thing. They had put all this together and come to the obvious conclusion. Because who else would have talked to them like that? He would have to be crazy. Now I was at an interesting point. I could easily, in any number of ways, let people in the building know that I wasn't, in fact, a cop. Or I could let them continue to think I was, which would be a dangerous game. But the thought of the all-night noise coming back convinced me to give it a shot. So over the next few weeks, I played up the cop routine. I found a New York Rangers hockey team warm-up jacket in a consignment shop and added some wraparound Oakley shades. The virtual uniform of the New York City undercover cop. I even went around the block a few times on patrol, giving a lingering stare to potential customers hanging in doorways, as in, move on. The charade began to wear on me, though. I started drinking more and sleeping badly, having crazy, violent dreams, which I wrote off to the stress of being a cop. One morning, about 6 a.m., I was yanked out of a deep sleep by the sound of a crowing rooster. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. All I could tell was that it was coming from the building in back of mine. In zero-tolerance mode, I pulled on my jeans, threw on the warm-up jacket, and grabbed the Oakleys. I marched around the corner and mashed all the buttons on the front door of the building until somebody buzzed me in. I bounded up the stairs, following the sound of the crowing. When I got to the floor where it seemed to be coming from, I pounded on an apartment door. "I'm looking for the rooster," I said. No one answered, but I could hear a sort of ragtag sing-along going on inside. I pounded on the door again. Nothing. I tried the door. It was unlocked. I stepped into a cramped apartment and saw a room full of men and women, small, mestizo-looking, sitting in a circle on folding chairs. "I'm here about the rooster," I announced. They looked up at me wide-eyed, obvious fear on their faces. I could see now that several of them were holding Bibles and that I had interrupted some kind of prayer meeting. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught my reflection in the mirror over the dining room table. Even shielded by the Oakleys, I looked deranged. One of the women began to cry, and the man next to her mumbled something in Spanish and took her hand in his. I realized that I must have looked like someone from immigration, or something worse. At that moment, the weight of the whole ruse crashed down on me. I was overwhelmed. I said, "I'm sorry," and backed my way to the door. Really sorry. By the time I got down to the street, my heart was thumping and I had broken into a cold sweat. When I rounded the corner and ducked back into my building, I came face to face with the dealer and his girlfriend. It seemed as if a tiny smirk played on his lips as they took in my panicked demeanor and exchanged looks. Then they moved past me, out the door. Up in my apartment, I began to wonder if the smirk meant something. Maybe they suspect what's going on. Maybe they've known all along and were waiting to see how long I'd play it out. Whatever it was clear I had had enough. That night, I put away the cop outfit for good. And when the super told me a couple of days later that the landlord was suddenly offering tenants modest buyouts, a few $1,000s, to give up their cheap rent-controlled leases, I decided to take it. A funny thing happened over the next few weeks as I got ready for my move. The dealer and his girlfriend disappeared. No one seemed to know what had become of them. Meanwhile, the entire building, in fact, the whole block, took on a relaxed, almost cheerful vibe. It was as if someone, some unsung hero, had reclaimed them for the people. The morning I moved out, a tenant was lovingly placing a potted plant in the freshly painted foyer. Down the street, in what had been an empty storefront, a new cafe was unrolling a grand opening banner. That was my last real lease on a New York City apartment. The few thousand I got from the landlord didn't last long, and I bounced around sublets and apartment shares for a year or so before leaving New York for good. I've been back to visit a few times, checked out my old building. The block, my beat. It's changed a lot, but it's still got an edge. Walking by, I get a brief surge of adrenaline, a muscle memory of fear or power. It's hard to tell which. Thank you.